assume there's no God.
It is not possible.
It is not possible
for God not to exist.
Not to exist.
I can say there is nothing, but that nothing is still God.
That nothing is still God.
Yes, sir.
So the problem of humanity, we come from the womb. Everything that you see here comes from the soil, comes from the ground. The food that we eat comes from the ground. So the mind, the way the mind is been programmed and created, it wants to know where the Supreme Being come from. How do you answer the mind that is saying, where does he come from? Because that answer, all the people who are underground, they never got an answer. They've been asking that question. Even the people who are on the ground. Yeah. There's a population underground, there's population on the ground. But we have this question, where does he come from?
This Supreme Being existed all by himself. In other words, he is a self-created God from nothing. Since we know the word creations means drawing something out of nothing. So God came out of nothing and he became God. These are all abilities joined together to form a God.
So how long did it?
So the question is, when did this philosophy, this doctrine, truly become solidified in Christianity? And as many Christians today will say that God is eternal, but that God is also outside of time and space. Many will think that this has been a Christian thought process since Christianity first began, but it has not. Some would think that it's been a doctrine, a thought process of Judaism, but yet it has not. In order to understand this fully, we're going to get all the way up to the year 1277. At the condemnation of 1277 in Paris, that is when this doctrine of God being outside of time and space became solidified within the Christian doctrine and Christian mythos. You see, before that, the Bible itself and the Torah teaches you that God is not eternal in the sense of living outside of time and space, but yet God is eternal as far as time is considered and space is considered. Because when you actually read the Bible and understand it for what it says and what the thought process of people at that time frame was, it was more of the view of Aristotle. And the Aristotle viewpoint of a vacuum is what most Jews and Christians actually followed. And in their writings, they never deterred from that, which is why you see that this God exists during as eternal as time and space has always existed as far as they're concerned. You start out with Genesis. In the beginning, when God began to create, the earth was in chaos and he hovered over the waters of the earth. There was already something there. There was already material. There was already space, and there was already time, but just not the time by which we measure time right now. Time was just different. It was galactic time. So just looking at Genesis, we see that this God existed and earth, matter existed already. Time existed already in concert with this God. Now, if you dig a little deeper and look at the research of where Jews came from, where the Israelites came from, we know that they came out of the Canaanites. And their God Yahweh was originally a son of El and his wife Asherah. And then later on, they merged Yahweh and El together. And he still had the wife Asherah. And then even later, during around the time frame of Jehoiakim, they got rid of Asherah. This is around 700 BCE when Asherah was then taken away. It was further taken away again after the Babylonian captivity ended. And the southern kingdom of Judah really got rid of Asherah at that point. And this is why when you go to certain ancient Israelite temples, you will see that they also had an Asherah pole right next to the El pole or Yahweh pole, Jehovah pole, whichever pole you want to call it. So in the New Testament, of course, Christians will say and always quote 1 Peter, where it says that one day to God is like 1,000 years to man. This still indicates that God exists in some level of a time frame and still exists in space. It doesn't make it where this God existed beyond the vacuum. But Aristotle and the teachings of Aristotle was very prominent in the learned circles of Christianity and the learned circles of sciences who happened to also be Christians throughout the uh, development of Christianity, into the Roman Empire development of Christianity, and then the subsequent breakup of the Roman Empire into the papacy of Christianity. In this Roman Catholic version, it wasn't until as I said before, the condemnation of 1277, that these views concerning Aristotle's ideas on a vacuum and how it is represented with God then gets changed, then gets cemented into what people view it, how people view it, and how they theorize it today. So what is that? So Aristotle viewed that, in the simplest of terms, that there is nothing in the universe that exists in a vacuum. He was correct as far as that aspect of it. His only difference that was later found to be incorrect was the fact that he thought that if a vacuum appeared, then the matter that was around the vacuum would then fill the vacuum immediately. And so therefore a vacuum was impossible, and that there is no such thing as having a perfect vacuum. This teaching was rampant throughout Christianity in the higher learned circles. And so there was a condemnation, a conference that was held. And this conference was held during these medieval times in Paris. And what you had there was you had a bishop, Stephen Tempier, well, it'd be Tempier, Stéphane Tempier, went on to say that this is heretical teaching, that God has always existed that God exists outside of time and space, that only man exists inside of time and space, and that God has always existed outside of that. Because they were teaching that nothing can exist outside of it. And as this gentleman is trying to say that even that nothingness was God, and that creation came out of nothingness. Now, that is normally something that Christians would say towards people who don't believe in God, that we believe that there was a nothing and then the earth, the universe was created, which actually is not what atheists and agnostics believe. And that is not what science teaches. What science teaches is that there is no such thing as a perfect vacuum, that instead of when a vacuum is present, that the materials that are thicker in their mass will take over that vacuum. It is actually the opposite. For instance, the core of the earth creates the gravity that draws everything inward towards it. The further away from that core, the less pressure and the less of an atmosphere is created. So there is truly no border to the Earth's atmosphere. It's just a point of when the gravitational pull gets so minimal that it creates the least amount of drag. Basically, when you have the lowest amount of neutrons, neutronian particles, the lowest amount of hydrogen particles that are being pulled in towards the Earth's atmosphere. And when you break free of that, you have less drag, which makes galactic travel easier. And so this is why we do what we do in space travel, or any spacefaring civilization would do so and be affected by the gravitational pull of any planet, because every planet, every thing in the universe is trying to pull as much material towards itself as possible. As we have moved more into that understanding of science, of course, the idea becomes even more embedded in Christianity that God exists outside of this time and space, but that we know it is an impossibility, because there is nothing outside of galactic time and space. Even our Milky Way galaxy is pulling things inward towards it, and every other galaxy is pulling material inward towards it as it moves throughout the universe. So therefore, God existing in nothingness is an impossibility. And it is during this condemnation that they really supplanted the idea of God acting in the supernatural. And the supernatural, if you think about just the words being said, it's still just the natural. It's just a natural that we don't fully understand yet. But this God is not what's existing out there. It still will boil down to science. So always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself. because your greatness is non-negotiable.